Joining me on the podcast today, Mr. Vincent Wynne.
How are you?
Doing good, man. So jump into it quick. Vincent's a local guy based out of Covington. He's been an attorney for how long?
26 years.
26 years in Covington, and
That's right.
I feel, pretty good chance going to be our next DA.
Well, I hope so. Obviously, I've made the decision to run, and looking forward to that. It's been a process already. Election's not till the 23rd, so we have a little bit of time. But thank you so much.
23rd of what?
March.
March the 23rd.
March.
So we're at the end of January 24.
About a month and a half or so.
About a month and a half.
And we're just trying to get our message out and let people know what I'm about and the fact that I'm a local guy and looking for folks some support. Really.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a local business owner here in Mandeville. I've been where I'm at for 20 years, and I'm 47 years old, and I have teenage kids, and never really had any. I didn't have any real interest in local politics. I didn't really feel like I belonged involved. I didn't have any draw to it.
Right.
It was kind of none of my business. But now that I'm been a part of the community for a contributing member of the community for a while, and I've paid my fair share of taxes, I'm starting to wonder, where's my money going?
Yeah, no, I get that.
What am I getting for my money? And my children are going to public school and becoming more integrated into our local community, our local society, and so as a parent and as a business owner, this just caught my attention, and I really feel like this is important.
I think it is very important, and obviously, I've been involved in politics for almost 26 years. I'm a business owner myself, own a law firm in Covington, had 3 partners, and so it's always been a priority of mine to make sure I know who's involved in the political scene and actually been involved, helped so many different folks run. A lot of work. Obviously, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But I think it's important for people to get involved. And I think nowadays there's a lot of political apathy, and people feel like their votes don't count. And in local elections, they do count. And if you're willing to get involved and figure out how to do it, it can be very fulfilling and rewarding. Very frustrating and very exhausting, but obviously very rewarding to be able to participate in a process that is so dear to our country and to what we're really about, right?
Yeah,
and so
it starts at home. It really does. And I think a lot of people feel like their vote doesn't matter in many cases, but it surely does. And if you can help to fortify your local community, if people do this all over the country, I think you can affect change this way in a positive way.
And it's one of the things that I've really tried to do. And so I did a speech for the MLK program about a week and a half ago, and I had one of my statisticians who we hired to do these things to give us data. I wanted to see what the voter turnout was for different folks, and I was shocked. In the last 2 judicial races, our voter turnout was only 24-25% here in St. Tammany, and it was 28% up in Washington Parish. That is abysmal. Mm-hmm. That is terrible. And you're talking about elections relative to a sheriff, a parish president, also 2 judges and a clerk, and it was still very, very low. And so, as a community, I think we really need to do better trying to educate folks and step them up. And, one of the things I indicated when I gave my little speech was it does start in the home, but it also maybe starts in the school and teaching kids how to vote, what it means to vote. Mm-hmm. Everybody loves to complain. we all on Facebook. Everybody loves to complain on Instagram and all these functions. But obviously, if you're not participating in voting, you really shouldn't be complaining. And so one of the things I preach and really try to instill in people is get out and vote. Get involved, participate. It's important.
I want to talk for a second the scope of what the DA's office does, and because a lot of people, I think, until you find yourself either a victim of a crime or charged with a crime yourself, you're not going to have a front row experience of what the DA's office actually does. And I don't think you want to wait until you're in trouble or something has happened to you before you start saying, what is this about?
Sure,
Why is this important?
Well, you got to think most people who get involved or have an involvement with the DA's office typically through a traffic ticket, right? And so here in St. Tammany Parish, we probably do about 25,000 tickets a year. That's a lot, right? But that's fairly common for a large jurisdiction. I mean, we have over 300,000 people here. We have 70,000 people in Washington Parish. And so that's usually people's first interaction with the DA's office. But there's also the felony division, and the felony division has anywhere from 2,600 to 3,000 individuals that get charged in our jurisdiction. Again, it is St. Tammany and Washington Parish. And then there's the whole other side of the DA's office that people don't really understand. There's the worthless check division, which is very important to businesses like yourself and actually me, because we write checks all day long. And obviously, if you're an individual looking to collect on a check, if somebody obviously wrote you a bad check, it's nice to have a DA's office that's willing to send a letter and say, hey, you better pay your money or I'm going to put you in jail, right? Now, obviously, it's not as formal as that, but it tends to work good. That's one of the divisions. And so there's also the issue of non-support, which I don't think people realize the DA's office does a tremendous job trying to collect. It's basically child support. Last year, I think there were over 1,400 cases filed. They average about 4,000 people in filing different, handling child support in that office. They only have 2 lawyers, and the turnaround time is 6, 7, 8 months. And so that needs to be really, really bolstered. Because think about it, if you're someone who is on child support, obviously you have monies to help with children, raising children. You don't necessarily need as many governmental assistance programs. And one of the things they do is try and weed those down and actually try and, it helps us as a community because your taxes are getting spent elsewhere.
Sure.
So that's another big issue. We have bond forfeitures and attachments that people do. That's the DA's office does those. I don't think people realize, but when you go to jail, unfortunately, hopefully people don't go to jail, but a lot of people do, it's an insurance policy and saying, hey, you're going to come to court. You're allowed, if someone doesn't show up, to collect that insurance policy, and then obviously the DA's office gets a portion of that. But that's also important. That's a civil issue for them. Mm-hmm. And then the asset forfeiture is also civil. That's if you have a drug interdiction issue where somebody coming through I-12, you catch them with a bunch of drugs and they have money, you can actually seize that money, and that money goes back to the agencies who seized the money and obviously the court system. There's a huge juvenile division in that court. That is criminal, obviously different than adult court, but very similar. It is criminal. And then you have the civil division itself, which has a ton of lawyers that actually represent the parish president and the council. And they do other things like boards. They represent hospitals. And so, about probably 2/3 of that office is really civil. It's not all criminal, and people don't realize that. And so it takes a breadth of experience to understand those different assets that the DA's office has. And really utilize those. And
There's a lot going on.
There is, and that's something that I pride myself on. I was obviously in the DA's office for 8 years, and then I've been in civil practice for a long time, and so I've dealt with those issues for years. I've been in private practice really 26 years, but portion of that I was at the DA's office for 8 of those years, and so I think I have a breadth of experience that's a little different from the folks that are running for this.
The local DA's office encompasses St. Tammany and Washington
Correct.
Parish. I think a lot of people may not realize that Washington Parish is big, and it doesn't have the population density that Mandeville has. That St. Tammany has. But my wife's family's from Washington Parish, and there's a lot up there. There's a lot of industry up there. There's a lot of commercial industry in.
It's a big mining community. I don't think people realize how much Washington Parish mines. They're still very much an agrarian society and group. People still farm. They still raise cows. They still milk cows. I was up in Mount Hermon yesterday at a little gathering, and Mount Hermon is right on the Mississippi line. And for me to get home, I live in Walheim. It took me an hour to get home. Now, if I'm coming all the way down to Slidell, it's almost 2 hours to get from one corner of Washington Parish down to the other.
It's a big place.
It is a huge jurisdiction. It really is. Great people, very different people. Obviously, Washington Parish, very rural. You get down to Slidell, working class, different folks, and then obviously, on this side, professionals a little bit more. So it's an interesting place to politic in.
It's a big turf.
It is.
So something that you mentioned, I went to one of your presentations that you gave in Bogalusa a few days ago, and you were talking about the number of people in the assistant DAs.
Sure.
And let me touch on that for a minute, because I really genuinely don't know how that works. How many assistant DAs are there? And do you decide how many people are working for you, or is there like a guide that you have to go by?
There really is no guide. So there's funding sources. Obviously, you get some from different areas. You can get them from ticket monies. You can get them from self-generated funds in the office, such as diversion. You get it from the state via warrants. We call them warrants, and those are actually what you get paid by the state to have DAs. And so I reference that because all those funding mechanisms generally depends on how you actually and what people you put in places. Obviously, we have 10 divisions in St. Tammany. We have 2 up in Washington Parish that are criminally active, 8 down in St. Tammany. So you need assistance in those divisions, and then obviously you need people to run, again, those divisions I was talking about, misdemeanor, traffic. You need people.
Like in a rough neighborhood, how many assistant DAs are there?
So for the best we can figure out, it's about 44 currently. Now, when I was there, we had about 23, 22, so there's been almost a doubling of assistant DAs, and I'm not really sure why.
Well, and that's ironic because there's been a doubling of assistant DAs, and then I heard a retired judge speak in Bogalusa, and he said when he was earlier in his career, he had 25 or 30 cases on his docket, and toward the end of his career, there was 100 plus.
Yes.
So we live in the information age where everything is but a click away. We're not waiting. We're not mailing letters back and forth to people, and somehow or another, the number of DAs has doubled, and the number of cases on the docket has gone up 5 times plus.
Right. Well, it's
what's causing that?
Well, it gets a little complicated, but I mean it's a thought process. The current DAs that are in division have no authority to make decisions on cases. Well, what does that mean? If you have a case that has 1, 2, or 3 different charges on it, and you and I, meaning the assistant DA and someone who's a criminal defense lawyer, agrees that 1 and 2 look great, we're going to go ahead and maybe make a pitch to get that person either pled out on that case. If you have a situation where that DA cannot make that decision to do that, which they do not have that authority, you then have to go back to the main office in Covington and actually speak with that individual and get that authority. Well, what happened was when you're sitting there at a arraignment or a trial posture, you have to continue that case, and then a memo has to be written in order to get that authority to make that decision. Well, that's a month, 2 months, sometimes 3 months before you can ever get that decision. And sometimes that decision is not quite what we had agreed upon. And so we then go back and forth, and this can happen for up to a year. And so all you end up with is a situation where cases just continually get continued. There's no decision that gets made. And ultimately, we do get to a resolution, but it can take a year or more before we get that.
And it's not necessary to take that long.
It is not. And so one of the things I'd like to do and will do is give my assistants authority to make those decisions on those cases that are not having to come back to me or my chief of staff, the one that's going to actually run the trials on felonies, to make those decisions. That's just very inefficient, and it doesn't make any sense to me.
You made a good point speaking the other night. You said it's not fair to the families who have had crimes perpetuated upon them, and it's not swift justice or a timely trial, for the person for the person who's accused of a crime. If whether they are guilty or innocent, getting to it more quickly while the ideas and the events are still fresh, where if you do need evidence, it's closer at hand. The longer you wait, the farther away that stuff gets from you.
Sure. I mean, think about it. You have evidence that starts to grow old. You have witnesses that may not be around anymore. So
people don't remember.
They don't remember. Yeah. People out on bond, if they do, if they're able to get out on bond, potentially sitting out waiting trial. If you have them out 1 or 2 years, they could recidivate and do something else. So obviously it's important, and Judge Childress stressed that in Bogalusa, and Judge Hand. I don't know if you've seen the video that Judge Hand did, and if you want, you can go on my page and see that. Both have indicated that is a huge problem, is the docket numbers and the slow nature of how things move in the system currently.
Well, see, I tell you, this stuff is fascinating to me. And one of my favorite things, I have a bunch of clients who are attorneys, and I enjoy visiting with them because you guys have the best vocabulary.
Oh, we try. We try to make ourselves look fancy or sound fancy.
No, I think it's wonderful. Your use of language is fantastic, and I'm always, I've always been a fan of language, and I love talking to people who just have this real, I don't know, just like a sharp use of language. I find it very interesting. When did you first? I want to talk about your career and your journey into the law. When did you first discover the law as a young person?
Now, I went to Mandeville High, public school kid, and they had a couple of debate classes there that we took and kind of participated in, and I realized I kind of have a knack for assimilating facts, remembering facts, and then arguing those facts. And some of my teachers at Mandeville, who I'm still close to today, said, Vincent, you're probably good at the law. I said, well, maybe so. I have no idea. But you
didn't have any.
No, I mean, none of my family were lawyers. Matter of fact, my family sold office furniture, if you can believe that, in the city of New Orleans. It was 80 Wynne Furniture Company. And so none of us were lawyers. That was just something for them. But I've always had that desire to argue with folks and politely. But
I imagine selling furniture in New Orleans was no easy task.
No, it could be, but my dad.
I think you learn a lot about people, though.
You do,
being face to face with people.
You do. And so when I graduated high school and obviously went to LSU, I got involved in the student body government and really enjoyed that. Did that for 3 years. Ended up being the Speaker Pro Tem for the entire student body government. Liked the political side of things. That was my major, political science. With a minor in Latin, if you can believe that. That's why I like
That's that language.
That's the language.
I love it.
But I realized, and while I was there, I got to work at the Capitol for Senator Hinton and Senator Hankel as first a sergeant in arms, and then pages for them, and really got to be around a lot of folks in the legislature are lawyers. And you get to see and meet them and how they handle themselves. So that kind of sparked my interest, and then I ended up working for a firm downtown Baton Rouge, and Phelps Dunbar, and actually got to see some cases argued, and so it really did pique my interest in the law. Didn't know if I was going to be able to do it, and there's a test you take. It's called the LSAT, and I'll never forget, there was about 10 of us that went and took it, and I think we'd gone out that evening and probably shouldn't have done it, and took the test, and I did very, very well on the test, very well. And I said, well, maybe this is for me, and applied and got accepted to, and I went to Loyola, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the law school aspect of things, and so it really piqued my interest. It was weird, and I've said this before. I love to fish. I love to hunt. I love boats. I wanted to be a maritime lawyer. Mm-hmm. And I never forget, someone got me an internship over in St. Tammany at the DA's office, and I thought, well, I'll go do it. I was making good money downtown, big firms. I mean, they paid us a lot of money, and this was free. I said, well, I'll go do it just to put it on my resume because it'll look good. I fell in love with the DA's office. I fell in love with prosecuting. I fell in love with helping people and just listening to their stories because I love storytelling. And that's really what lawyers do. Obviously, you tell a story. It's a complicated story sometimes, but it's really what you do. And if you're good at it, then you're good at what you do, and you can become a very good lawyer. And so I've always had the knack of, I guess you could say my wife says I talk too much. But it's a little more poignant than that. It's actually being able to tell a good story. And I think that's why I like politics so much, and I like being a lawyer, because you can tell a good story, then you can do well at it.
You have to have a desire, I think, to communicate, and you have to take pleasure in that process.
Sure.
I feel I like to do that in my work as a jewelry maker and as a salesman, where I have to be talking with my clients and listening, and I've had it happen to me many times. I love it because I've always enjoyed finding parallels in people's professional careers, because anybody who I think does anything professionally on a high level, you have to be emotionally, or at least your heart's got to be in it.
Sure,
you got to be
absolutely.
dedicated to it. And I think trying to attach yourself to something, you have to find a way that you can attach yourself to something. And I take a vested interest in people's the outcome. Mm-hmm. Like I want people to buy the stuff. I want them to buy the ring.
Yeah, but it's an
necklace.
artistic expression of what you like, and obviously what somebody else. And if you can get to that bridge where you both agree, then that's a great thing.
Well, I want to know what their intention is. Sure. I want to know where they're trying to get to, because once I figure out where they're trying to get to, then I can help to create a vehicle for us to get there. I can say, like, I think this is how we're going to do this. And storytelling is a part of it, and listening. You really got to learn to listen.
I think that's in every business. I think you really have to have that knack to talk to people. I think if you look at some of the most successful people, and I've been fortunate in being around politics, I get to meet a lot of these folks, and they all have a very similar personality. They like to talk to people. They're friendly. They're good storytellers. They're people that you can associate with them and say, hey, I like that guy. He's genuine. He's not fake, and you start trusting him. And look, it is in any business. People have to trust you, and especially in my business. I mean, it's people are coming to you because they're usually not in a good spot, right? And there's something going on, or not always, but I mean, a lot of times there is. And so people have to trust you. And so obviously in your business too, people have to trust you. They're about to spend a lot of money.
You have to earn their confidence.
That's right.
Is what I always say. And that's my mindset is on, I have to earn their confidence, and I have to establish myself as a reliable, resource for them, for them to say, hey, you know what? This is my guy. He's got it. You know, he knows what he's talking about, and he's working for me.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good thing. It's a really good position to find yourself in.
And it is nice for me because I love what I do. I tell people that all the time, and my staff, they fuss at me because, look, it's a very, very stressful business. And people don't realize, I mean, we have people's lives in our hands, but, you know, from domestic litigation to if we're doing a business issue, and, you know, these people can be broke. I mean, if we fail and we're not doing a good job. So it's a lot, but, you know, you really have to love it. And one of the things I do love the prosecution aspect of it, not from a stance of putting people in jail, but just, and obviously that is not what this is about, but it's also about our community and making sure we're safe, making sure that if we do have the opportunity to help some folks that may have addiction issues, that are young folks. Because look, one of the things that I see day in and day out, and I go to court every day of my life when I'm working, every day. There's no quitting. I go to court every day. And I see people lining up 8, 10 of them a day, young folks, 18 to 24. And if those kids are getting felonies, we're throwing those kids away. I mean, those folks can't get jobs. So there may be a better angle, in my opinion, to do something other than just give them the felony. Obviously, career criminals, people who are violent criminals, we're going to have to address those. But there may be some other angles, and we have such great programs in St. Tammany and the ability at the DA's office to maybe help people. And I really want to do more. I want to help people.
Drugs are a huge issue. I think, you know, there's problems with it everywhere. In some places, it's in higher density. And it starts out, you know, oftentimes, you know, kids getting involved in you know, drinking and you know, using marijuana or these days it's vapes, you know, and the vapes are an epidemic. I can tell you firsthand, I have kids in high school. It is an epidemic, and what ends up happening is because it's become commonplace, it's become acceptable. People aren't quite as afraid of it as, you know, we were growing up. It was, you know, I grew up in the just say no generation.
Sure,
right?
oh yeah, we all grew up in that generation.
There was a lot of that going on.
We're the same age, so yeah.
But that just say no thing, hey man, that wasn't a joke. It really kind of stuck with people. And I remember, you know, saying no thanks plenty times.
Right.
And, you know, by the time I ever did anything inappropriate, I was much older. I never did anything like that when I was in high school, you know, or a child, you know.
And accessibility now with prescription medication is just rampant. It is amazing how much, you know, the prescription.
That's another problem.
It is a tremendous problem. Obviously, marijuana. I mean, it's legal if you have your card. And so there's accessibility issues now. I mean, kids that are under the age of 18 have access to things that you and I would never have dreamed of. Now, obviously, marijuana was in the school systems. It wasn't cool. That's not what we felt focused on. I mean, we were trying to steal a couple of beers and some Boone's Farm every once in a while. Really showing my age at
wine
that point.
Coolers.
Yeah, that's it, wine coolers. But so, yeah, I mean, that shows our age. But so it's a different, you know, and kids nowadays, that, you know, we all had a fear factor. You know, if you take some weird pill, you might end up dead. And I don't know that children these days, and I say children, kids under the age of probably 20, because I still call those, they're adults when they hit 18, but they're still very young. They don't have that fear factor that just gives me a cause for concern. And so, you know, if you can catch those folks young as they're juveniles or even in that 18 to 24-year-old range and give them some tools to understand, hey, you got to change. This is not how this needs to be. I really think we can make a difference. And you know, that's something that's a grassroots effort, right? That comes with churches and communities, schools, and really kind of bolstering that thought process. Because, you know, as a society, we've seen to backpedal a little bit from that. And so I'd like to see that a little bit more, you know, the outreach and trying to help these kids.
I don't know what's happening as far as you know, presentations that are being done for school kids. There seems to be a lot of things that they used to do in school that they don't do anymore.
Right.
I remember in school, junior high, I remember them bringing people from Tangipahoa Parish jail, bringing them there in cuffs into the gym, and they'd walk them up to a podium, uncuff them, and let them talk.
Sure.
And they would tell grim stories. They would say, let me tell y'all what happened to me. And
you know, fear sometimes helps, right?
It's the truth.
It's the truth that's scary. And I'm not saying you obviously instill fear in children, but I'm saying if they understand the ramifications of a lifestyle that is not necessarily going to lead them in a productive place, then obviously I think they benefit from it. They understand that, sure. Nowadays they just don't see that. And so, boy, it'd be nice to bring some of those programs back and really work with some of our local churches who do an excellent job, but they're hindered too, right? They're limited in their scope. So, I mean, that's one of the things I'd like to see us do for kids.
Right on. So I don't want to spend the whole time in, talking about crime, but but unfortunately, that's I think that's on a lot of people's minds. Let's step out for to a national level. If you look at what the condition of the country is, we live in a pivotal time. Things are going fast. The snowball is rolling fast, much faster than I think it's. If you look historically, and I try not to get so caught up in watching the news and all the doom and gloom stuff that it ruins my day.
It'll drive you crazy
Will.
sometimes, and it actually gives you a little apprehension as to what's really going on. Is this the media drumming this up, or is this really what's going on? And I think there's two sides to that story too.
I think it's being compounded by the media because bad news sells. But if you look, one of the things a way that I've found to kind of console myself and bring myself back is to look historically over the last 100 years of American history and look at some of the things that have happened looking at since World War I and then World War II and the Depression in between and there's always been pardon the expression, but the shit's always been about to hit the fan in some way or another.
I mean, whether we're involved in a war and we're trying to get above that and move on. One of the things that's always concerned me in the past, let's just say 6 or 7 years, is this concept of defund the police. It is just, look, I'm a huge supporter of law enforcement. I know a lot. Look, I grew up in the DA's office and around this community for a long time, and I've been around law enforcement pretty much my entire career, and they do a tough job. Even in St. Tammany, where we're very safe. Obviously, there's parts of Washington Parish, Bogalusa, that has some issues. Some parts of Franklinton, more so than obviously St. Tammany. And we still have some issues here, but wow. Why would ever anybody have that concept that let's not support our local law enforcement? Because
what good could that possibly do?
They're great folks. They do a lot. They work selflessly, very different, difficult shifts. And for us not to support that is just mind-boggling to me. And one of the things that as a DA, I'm going to make sure that those guys are protected and make sure that they're supported as much as I possibly can, because I think that's tremendously important for our community, but also for, just our children to understand. We need that respect. And we've lost that a little bit.
I agree.
I think we have lost that. And people have been given this concept, well, I can talk back to the police and I can do what I want and I don't necessarily have to listen to them. That's not the best way to handle things. Now, look, police may not always be right and the person may not always be right, but let's be cordial. Let's figure out what's going on. And sometimes those things are escalated and it's hard to do that. But boy, that is to me something that in the fabric of our current world that is really concerning. Why would ever disrespect law enforcement? I
think it's an unfortunate byproduct of pop culture.
It probably so.
Well, it's constantly on the phone. You see these videos of people mouthing off to the cops, and look, and you said it. The police aren't always right, but they're always coming in the situation in the dark.
And they have a tough job. They do. Job. And so think about rolling up on a scene. You have no idea. Three or four people are fighting over an issue. You don't know what's going on. And so you try to make everything as good and calm as you can, and that's not always going to happen. But the concept of not giving them some respect is just, we need to do that. I mean, in our culture, I think that's been lost. And boy, that's a lot for me.
It is. And, in law enforcement is a tough, it's a tough job to do. And unfortunately, it's become a tough job, made even tougher by the circumstances that they have to work in. Whether it's pushback from the people that they're interacting with, or everybody knows the policemen don't make enough money.
No.
You know, it's like school teachers. Everybody knows they don't make enough money.
And by the way, they do a great job too, and they have to do
a difficult job.
Both my sisters are teachers, and God bless them. I don't know how they do it. They're wonderful, and most teachers obviously have great hearts, and it's very similar in that vein. You know, you do it because it's a calling, but wow, it's difficult these days.
It'd be nice to be able to pay your bills.
Yeah.
You know, and I know a lot of police officers who have second jobs. You know, they do lawn care.
Lawn care. They do, you know,
after working these incredibly long shifts, and then they have to go and work like that in the sun. I think it's completely inappropriate that it's set up that way. I don't know what to do to change it, but I think it's a big issue.
It's obviously a cultural issue. And look, these guys put their life on the line every day, and I don't think people realize that, or they do and they forget about it. So, wow, if we could just make sure we support our law enforcement community, obviously local law enforcement here, but all over the country, we just need to get back to look. I'm not saying that they're the end all be all, and again, they do make mistakes, but they're trying to do their best. They really are, and they do a lot to help us keep us safe. So it's important.
So I'm glad we're talking about all this stuff, because I think it really shows how, and I really feel like we're just breezing over the top of all the different things that attract the DA's office's attention. There's a tremendous amount of things you guys have to
look, I always say
deal
this.
with.
The DA's office typically sets the tone for local law enforcement because they're the ultimate decision maker when it comes to, you know, if a charge gets accepted or prosecuted or not, and what the end result is. So it's important for your DA to be very supportive of local law enforcement and to make sure that they have the right tools so they know what they're doing to make sure that everybody's working harmoniously. I can tell you that's not happening right now. And so there's a lot of discord between the DA's office and the local law enforcement communities, despite what you see on Facebook and the endorsements that are out there. The local rank and file guys that are out there know it's hard, it's tough. And that's not how it should be with the DA's office. It should be a harmonious transition, and there shouldn't be any issues there. But there are. And so I want to fix that. I want to restore that trust and that balance that should be there.
Well, I tell you what, I couldn't agree more, and I'm very hopeful, you know, that that you can affect some change, and you can get in there and do, you know, the hard work that I know it takes to be good at any business, you know, to be good at any profession. You know, I think a lot of times people end up looking at politics as a way to avoid real work. You know, that's sort of like the public perception. You know, people go and they want to get involved in politics so they can get on the government feed trough and go easy. You know?
I can see that. But I can tell you, in the higher levels, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work for not a lot of pay. And so you really have to have it in your heart that you're willing to do it and help the community out, because you know, it is. I mean, it's a lot of work. And one of the things that I really want to bring to the DA's office that's really not been there for a long period of time is just the concept of a private enterprise. You know, you and I both, look, we have to work hard every day. We got to provide an excellent product, or people are not coming back to us.
Yeah, and if I fail at my job, I go out of business.
You go out of business. Well, in the government world, you just keep getting more money. You keep asking for money. You keep asking for more taxes. More staff. But if you can bring that business sense to a governmental entity such as the DA's office, I think that resonates with the community, because they realize, I'm going to do a good job. I'm going to do more with less. I'm going to try and get to a point where I can streamline that office, so I'm not asking, which I'm not, by the way, asking for a tax. I won't ask for a tax as your next DA. And so we've got to look within and figure out how we can self-generate money and make sure that office is operating like it needs to. And I think that requires someone who has a breadth of experience. Look, I was at the DA's office. I know how to run it. But I've also been a businessman in this community, and it's tough. I mean, you know, it every day. You wake up every day making sure that you got enough money to make payroll, and that you got enough money to you know, if you got to front money on cases or do what you got to do. If you're not providing a good product, people aren't coming back to you. And I think to apply that to a governmental such as the DA's office is a good thing. I think people would resonate. It would resonate with people.
I think it's interesting that that you're not really, you know, of course you have rules, you know, that you need to follow and things that you need to do, but I get the sensation that the product of the DA's office is a direct reflection of the character of the person who's calling the shots.
No question.
I mean, it really seems like there's a lot, like a judge, for example. A judge is going to sit on the bench and he's going to look at the law and he's going to look at the facts and he's going to really, really, you know, make a decision based on the nuts and bolts of everything he sees. and that's their job.
Right.
It seems like in your position, there's a little more. What's the word I'm looking for? There's a little more.
You can put your own.
You put exactly.
spin on
You
it.
put it. There's a piece of you involved.
Right.
In it.
Now, obviously, my job is to follow the law, to make sure that it is being upheld and that the what needs to be prosecuted is getting prosecuted. But how you get to that point, I think, is different, right? And so one of the things I've been saying on the campaign trail is obviously my breadth of experience compared to my opponent, who really has been a governmental employee all his career. He was a federal prosecutor for a period of time. And he's really brought that federal sense to an office that really is a state office. It's a community-based office. Look, I think as the DA, you need to meet with people, period. Again, telling a story, right? That's what lawyers do. How do you know what your constituency and the folks that run your community, if there's problems, if you're not meeting with them? And so one of the things I think you need to do is be in different locations. Because, look, the DA's office has locations in Franklinton and Slidell. They closed the office in Bogalusa, one of our areas that has one of the,
they have some of the worst problems.
Worst problems. And so the office got closed there. So obviously I want to reopen that office. But people want to be able to talk to their DA, to their DA staff, to understand, because it's important, because you can affect, look, if the crime goes away in Bogalusa, what happens to Bogalusa? Business comes back.
Sure.
People want to invest there. People want to put money there. I think that's important. So if we keep things safe, and look, we have a great quality of life here in St. Tammany and Washington Parish, we got to make sure that stays like that. And that means that you have to talk to people to find out where the problems are.
My father-in-law has lived in Bogalusa since the 80s, and he's told me, he said, man, it was a different place. He said it was just,
if you hear the stories about how vibrant it was, and it was I had no idea they almost had 48,000 people in Bogalusa. They had 4 different sections of Bogalusa, and they had all kind of rivalries. It's kind of like New Orleans with, the uptown areas and downtown and all that. I had no idea, and so some of the old timers would tell you stories about how vibrant it was, and it's pretty amazing.
He also told me there was a lot of people, in the old days that would, retire in New Orleans, and instead of moving to Mandeville or Covington like everyone does, they'd move up to Bogalusa and go live in the country, to try to have a peaceful, life. And now people tend to do that here in Mandeville. Mandeville was very, very small. Only 20 years ago, or you go back 30 years in Mandeville, and it was a different place.
I can remember when there was only one stoplight in Mandeville, and so they had no humps. Everybody's like, what are the humps? The humps that go over all the different overpasses. They weren't there. That's how long I've been here in St. Tammany, and so it's a different culture, different place, but it's changed. And
as the people come,
right,
more responsibility for law enforcement comes, more money from taxes. There's a tremendous amount of commerce taking place in Mandeville that was not, 15, 20 years ago, was not happening. They're building houses on every spot they can find that's, flat enough to put a slab. So there's a tremendous amount of money moving around. There should be lots of tax money to be getting things done.
There should be, but unfortunately, a lot of that money is dedicated funds, and it's hard to figure out where to apply some of those funds. And so, look, the people of St. Tammany spoke relative to the Justice Center and some of the taxes that the DA and some of the other folks put forward. They don't want another tax. They want us to figure out how to pay for these things. And so it gets tough, because as a governmental, obviously, entity, you need money to make sure you operate well. You got to make sure you're doing it as efficiently as you can to work within your budget.
Sure. So, I don't. There's nothing I can do about paying taxes. I don't think there's anything anybody can do about paying taxes. No. You got to pay taxes. But boy, it would sure be nice to see it working. Or to get the sensation that you can see it working, that you can see positive things happening, and that's, I think, one of the biggest reasons why I think people should get concerned with who's getting what position.
No question.
And where.
No
matter who you vote for. I'd recommend you go with Vincent. He's a solid dude. But
I appreciate that endorsement.
Nothing to it. But
but I appreciate
you got to go vote for somebody. Get
out
involved.
And vote. Go get involved. That's an important process. It is. You have to be involved. Yeah. It's just hard to get people to understand that sometimes. Because look, we get busy in our lives, raising kids. We're on the soccer fields. We're at the basketball courts. with our children. And as you get older, you get a little more introverted and not necessarily out in the public as much. But they vote. They do vote. But boy, it's going to be a low turnout race for election for my race.
I was talking to my dad about this, and he said, we had a farm in Tangipahoa Parish growing up, and that's what we did. We were dairy farmers. And, I wasn't interested in being a dairy farmer or continuing. Some other members of my family did, but I was to the point to where, agriculture is difficult. Terrible way to make a living. It's hard.
Is tough.
It's so hard.
I actually farm. I have blueberries at my property in Walheim. I spent a lot of time fooling with just some blueberry bushes that don't move. They just stand. I can't imagine trying to
Having
do it with
cows.
cows. I know.
People tell me all the time, I think I might get some cows. And I go,
no.
Don't do it. I'm like, don't do it.
Let's get some horses, Dad. I mean, that's what they told me for ages. And then we ended up with like 20 chickens, and they abandoned, my kids abandoned me. And they're like,
Yeah.
we don't want to fool with those chickens anymore.
That's
And you're
what
like,
they do.
oh, my goodness.
My son told me this morning he wanted an emu. I said, man, do you remember when we had the chickens?
And nobody wanted to
I
fool with them.
couldn't get you to feed them.
I know.
But it's interesting, that path that I think a lot of people take, from one, where you grew up to what you end up doing for a living. And but going back to what I was saying about what my father said, when we had the farm, we did a lot of dove hunting out there and deer hunting and whatnot, but we would have these dove hunts, and my cousin still puts on wonderful dove hunts out of his property, and my father would invite all sorts of people from around and people from the community, and some political guys would show up, we were dairy farmers way out in the country, and I asked my old man, I was like, did you know these guys, before? Did you go to school with any of these fellas? He goes, kind of. He said, I knew them from around and whatnot. He said, but really, and I think I'm making this point so that people can understand why it may be important to vote. Because my dad told me this, and I never thought about this before. He said the reason why I was involved and wanted to know who was in what position and have some FaceTime with these people, he said, because I had you guys. He said, I had kids. And he said, if something happens with your children involved in either a crime or an accident or something happens, you want to make sure that you're being properly represented, that you're getting.
Sure.
You don't want to get run under the wheels of the system. You want to make sure that you're getting a fair shake. Look, if you mess up, you mess up.
Sure.
There's no.
But you have someone to talk to, and at least you have. For a while, the folks that are currently in that office have always thought that was corruption. It's kind of a strange thought process, and that's something they try to hang around my neck, is that, if I'm going to be talking to all these people, then I'm going to be helping them and dismissing cases. And that's the furthest from the truth, because the reality, as you just said, I can't help everybody, but at least I have the dignity and the decency to sit with them and say, look, I love you. I understand what you're doing. I think you're great, but unfortunately, I can't help you.
Well, this is your best path forward.
This is your best path forward, but I gave them the respect to sit there and talk.
I think in modern society, the idea of pulling strings for people, that's a slippery. It's a path to destruction.
Sure.
But because in the information age, if you do something like that, everybody finds out about it.
Well, the world's going to know anyway.
Instantly.
Yeah.
So there's no real upside to it. And if somebody's done something wrong or something bad has happened, the best you can hope for is to make sure that you're getting the application of the law accurately and in a timely way. That is the best you can hope for, because if something's happening, and I think people should get concerned in that, because if something does happen to you and you do find yourself in a situation, I would really like to have a reasonable man who's available, or at least have the opportunity to have him say, here, this is the person you need to talk to. This is the person you need to speak with, who's going to tell you the best path forward for your situation. So if you don't think this is important to you, think about it like that. It could become important to you, because things happen. Gosh, with teenage kids, this is a whirlwind, man. Everybody told me this was going to be challenging, but golly.
It can be. And it's not just kids. So, you end up with situations where you have businesses and people that get charged because they have different ideas of other people. And there's contractor fraud issues, and one of the big hot button issues right now is the library boards and how those affect people. I'm not going to get into that because that becomes very complicated. But obviously having a connection to a DA that you can at least talk with and say, this is our side and our position. Again, not that I'm going to side with you, but at least you have that opportunity to do so, because it's not just obviously about kids, but it's business. It's about, things that actually come up on a day-to-day basis, and it makes a difference. It really does.
I focus on kids often, and I say kids, I mean young people.
Right.
People up into their 20s, because you're still doing foolish things into your 20s that could.
You and I know that.
Ooh,
25, they're still. I mean, I say that 24 nowadays. They're still pretty young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, I was doing stupid things. I don't know if I'm gonna stop completely doing stupid things.
And it's important for me, that access too is just not just obviously affluent folks in Mandeville. It's the folks that live in Lacombe that are obviously have a little less, they're not as affluent, right? And so race lines should not have anything to do with that. Obviously, you need to make sure that you would make that available for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's important.
I'm just talking about, and we agree completely. I'm talking about fair application of the law. And I think that's something that people feel like they're not going to get a fair shake. They think I think there's a public opinion out there is that once you're in trouble, it's all downhill, and it doesn't have to be that way.
No.
It's the responsibility of the person who's in a bind to do different. So if you're involved in behavior that's yielding you a consistent bad result, you're on your way to a life of being in trouble.
Sure.
And there's an opportunity for young people to learn. Maybe they didn't. Some kids are more hard-headed than others, and maybe they don't learn that you don't do this and you don't do that. And the first time they really come up against it is with law enforcement.
Sure.
And so what's going to happen now? Are they going to be crushed, or are they going to have the opportunity to look at it and say, hey, you know what, I really messed up
and learn from it.
I need to do different.
Right.
And I think law enforcement, and of course, this goes back to the DA's office. How is this going to be? Sure. How is this person going to be dealt with?
Yeah.
What's the best outcome? And looking at it on a case by case basis, and putting your soul into it, in the real hope that it comes out in a positive or the best way forward. I couldn't agree more that is terribly important.
It is. I think it's very important for our community. Obviously, we still have to prosecute the bad crimes, because there's a bunch. I mean, there's still things that happen here that are, I think a lot of the community would have just no understanding of the issues that are there, and from sex crimes to murder to burglaries, it's there.
Yeah.
But that's not the bulk of what happens. I mean, that's probably 30% of what we do. You would deal with at a DA's office, and so it's important to ask, have an opportunity for people to do something else. Look, one of the things that we did back in the DA's office when I was there is we gave people an opportunity. They could either go to jail or they could go into the military. Wow, that was a great thing. And so the recruiters really enjoyed that. And I'm not saying it's for really bad folks, but people who mess up and want a different opportunity in life, as opposed to going in and spending a bunch of money maybe on diversion or being put on probation where they're going to have issues. Let's give an opportunity to go into the military.
The discipline could do them good.
Sure. I mean, you're going to end up making some men at that point and changing some lives. So I'm a big proponent of that. I want to bring that back.
I think that's good stuff.
Yeah,
I really do.
It is.
Vincent, thank you so much for coming out. Look, we could talk on this for hours, because I really get the impression that this thing is bigger than most people realize, and the depth of responsibility that comes along with law enforcement, comes along with the prosecution of crime. It's a really big topic, and
it is.
I know we've just breezed over it today, and I know a lot of people, either themselves have had something happen, or they know people in their family, especially with all the drug problems that we're having around the country.
Sure.
And in our area, we're not special; we have it too. I think it's super important, and I just really do appreciate you coming and talking about it. And
I appreciate it. And it gives me an opportunity to kind of explain who I am, but also to understand the DA's office is more than just felony prosecutions.
For sure.
It means so much. It's got so much different areas of the practice of law. It's just it's almost like a large law firm is really what you could liken it to. And so I think the community needs to understand that, and it takes somebody with a breadth of experience. 26 years of this, and I pride myself on that. And so I've learned a lot, and I'm ready to apply that to this position and do a great job for the community.
It's the Diamond King.